welcome back to my channel. In this video, I wanted to talk to you a bit about positive stereotypes, because I've been doing some research about positive stereotypes, and I came across an article called "The Insidious and Ironic Effects of Positive Stereotypes" in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology from March of 2013. So I just want to read out to you some of the main highlights from this article. The problem with positive stereotypes is that they increase the likelihood that positively stereotyped group members will be pigeonholed into certain career tracks. Because positive stereotypes, for example the black athlete stereotype, is less likely to be noted as information worthy of skepticism, they may be especially potent means of ironically triggering other negative stereotypical beliefs, for example that African Americans are criminal, as they influence general beliefs about the nature of group differences, resulting in biological essentialism. Benevolent sexism is an example of positively stereotyping women, for example that they are more polite than men. And this benevolent sexism is detrimental to gender equality because it appears flattering. The more people are willing to entertain sweeping generalisations about groups based on social categories, the more likely they should become to believe these differences are the result of something fundamentally different about the group. And positive stereotypes are less likely to be coded as biased or trigger negative emotions, so they are more effective than the negative ones of enhancing beliefs that a group is fundamentally, essentially, biologically different. And exposure to positive stereotypes may increase the likelihood of perceivers applying negative stereotypes. And this is because networks of information about social groups are entwined and connected in memory. So when one aspect of a stereotype is made more accessible, the others become more likely to be used in social judgments. It's both positive and negative stereotypes are connected in the brain's sort of memory circuits, and exposure to positive stereotypes means that by association means that the person is also more likely to remember negative stereotypes. So they all interact. So when people think they're being flattering when they positively stereotype a woman, for example, the same person is also more likely to believe negative stereotypes, because they're associatively connected in the brain, the memories for each stereotypes, because both rely on essentialising and categorising people into impersonal groups and ignoring individuality, which is what stereotypes do. They take away someone's individuality and dehumanise them. So the same process is at play in both positive and negative stereotypes. It doesn't matter whether it's framed benevolently or not. It's still sexism, it's still racism, it's still ableism. And the reason why I'm talking about positive stereotypes, by the way, is because autism is one of the most heavily positively stereotyped conditions, and it seems as though while people are moving away from negative stereotyping, at least you see this a lot in the neurodiversity movement, they're increasingly positively stereotyping. In actual fact, the neurodiversity movement is really complicit in this. I see this a lot, particularly capitalist organisations which have co-opted neurodiversity rhetoric will go on and on about the talent pool of neurodiversity, about how great people with autism are at like pattern detection, how efficient they are, treating them all like one group. Now, if you did go with any other group of society, you'd be called out. But with autism, it seems perfectly acceptable. But it's no better than negative stereotyping. It's still stereotyping and essentialising and dehumanising, therefore. Now, a guy called Oliver Burkeman, who's a psychologist, he also wrote an article in The Guardian, it's quite an old article, but it's still pertinent, called Why Stereotypes Are Bad Even When They're Good. And he refers to the research I just talked about there a moment ago. The study centred on fake articles purporting to show evidence for 3 stereotypes about black people. For example, that they're less intelligent, more prone to violence, and that they're better at sports. The article claiming to show superior athletic ability was more likely to be accepted as true and to fly under the stereotype detecting radar. Because it sounds positive, doesn't it? But it's not, it's still a stereotype and it's still racist. But it sounds positive, so it's less likely that people will kind of see it as such necessarily. I guess a bit like saying women are so polite and women is like a bucket loads of empathy. Is less likely to be seen as sexist, even though it is. And there actually isn't any difference between sexism and racism. They're all isms, they're all offensive. They're just as offensive as one as the other, but so many people don't realise that. That's something that really makes me pissed off because, yeah, it just makes me pissed off. But anyway, something I fail to understand. But anyway, moving on. So as I said, the article claiming to show that African Americans had superior athletic ability was more likely to be accepted as true and to fly under the stereotype detecting radar. When asked to estimate the probability that a series of people with African American sounding names might commit a crime, people exposed to a positive stereotype rated that possibility higher than did those exposed to a negative one. So the positive stereotype that African Americans are good at athletics led to a stronger negative beliefs than a negative one. For example, that they're prone to violence. It's almost like, because the positive stereotype had flown under people's radar and they didn't see it as a stereotype, they were, in a sense, less critical. So they were more likely to take on board the other more negative stereotypes as true. Whereas those who'd been exposed to the negative stereotype had already had their stereotype kind of radar kind of turned on, as it were. So they then had this kind of cognitively became more critical and saw the positive one as being a stereotype as well. Saw the the ones who've been exposed to the negative stereotype already had their critical antennae turned on. Whereas the ones who've been exposed to the positive stereotype, because that had kind of they hadn't kind of critically checked that as a stereotype, it had gone under the radar, it had kind of primed them to believe other essentialist stuff about, in this case, African Americans, because they hadn't had their critical antennae kind of turned on, as it were. That's the problem with positive stereotypes. They trigger negative stereotypes because they go under the radar. So the person isn't being so critical, they're more likely to believe other things. So this shows how relating to people as members of a demographic category not as individuals. For example, benevolent sexism is harmful, resulting in the idea that women are more enslaved to their biology than men, for example. It doesn't matter whether it's framed positively or negatively, it's still harmful because it takes away their freedom, their autonomy as individuals. And I would argue that we can actually see the same happening with autism. So there was also another article in Psychology Today entitled Campaign of Positive Stereotypes for Art Makma, PhD, whereby there was a series of studies by John Oliver and Sapna Sherian in the January 2013 issue of Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And it found that being positively stereotyped made people feel less like an individual. It made people feel depersonalised and angry. When you find a stereotype apply to you, it removes some of your individuality. This is frustrating. It's frustrating to realise that someone views you just as a member of a group and not as an individual. And when I read this in Psychology Today, it was really quite validating, because I've experienced exactly that when people positively stereotype me because of my autism and say, oh, this is like, lots of autistic people do that. You know, I notice this a lot, I see this a lot in autistic people, that they're all so determined, and this is a common trait in autistic people. Your honesty is a common autistic trait. I immediately start to feel really angry, and I think, and this article has explained exactly where that anger comes from. It is very true what it says, that it makes you feel depersonalised, dehumanised, de-individualised. I like to think that for positive characteristics I have, for example, that I care a lot about justice, that I'm a determined person, is part of me as a person. It's part of my uniqueness as a human being, as an individual. It makes me who I am. It's got all to do with my disability, because at the end of the day, my disability is my facticity. That's something that I don't control. Like, I don't control the fact I have these negative deficits. That's my disability. Just as the fact I can't control that I have ovaries and that I'm biological female. I can't control that. That's my facticity. That's the negative in my life. But myself, my characteristics are part of me. They make me unique. They are not shared across the fucking group. Yes, sure, there might be other women who have those characteristics. There might be other autistics who share those characteristics. But at the end of the day, they're part of me. They're my uniqueness. So when someone says it's to do with autism, which to me is a negative, because that's a negative pole in my life, it is fucking offensive. So excuse my F words, I just had to get it off my system. So reading this article actually was reconfirming, and it shows I'm not the only one to feel angry and depersonalised. This is a common human reaction to being dehumanised, depersonalised by other people who think it's acceptable to reduce everything about you to your group. I just thought I'd get it off my chest. So let me know if any of you also feel offended when people reduce your positives to your facticity. I've talked about this before, the difference between facticity and transcendence, where facticity is the negative pole in existence, which is the part of you which you can't control, which is the group you belong to. Your transcendence is your freedom, and that's your uniqueness, and only the negatives are related to your facticity. All positives should be seen as your uniqueness, and if someone takes your positives and reduces them to your facticity, I would say that's deeply offensive. It's a bit like immigrants have often been typecast as being hardworking, but hardworking is a positive trait, and I can imagine that an immigrant who maybe is hardworking might see that as offensive, because they'll be like, no, that's got to do with being an immigrant, that's to do with me and my personality. And likewise, not all immigrants are hardworking, and it's deeply offensive and dehumanising to that group of people, because being an immigrant is a facticity. Like, they can't control being an immigrant, but like their own personality is the positive dimension. That should be seen as a human factor, as a uniqueness, and not related to that category. So yeah, let me know what you think. Okay, so thank you for watching.